Today we'll be sharing with you 5 tips on how to cope with cumulative grief in light of COVID-19.
Hi, I'm Tony
And Jeff
Brabeck, founders of Our Little Sparrows Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support. If you would like to know more about us and our organization, please click the link in the description below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell to receive alerts when we release new video podcasts weekly. Is it possible that you might be experiencing cumulative grief? What does that even mean in light of COVID-19? We are going to define cumulative grief today and discuss how it may be reflecting in your life as a parent of pregnancy and infant loss. We are in the middle of 2020 and are over 5 months into the COVID-19 pandemic. We have seen how drastic and quickly our country has had to change and adapt to the constantly changing mandates set by our governments. Businesses have been lost, schools closed, our way of life has been restricted to staying at home or social distancing. It is no doubt that we all have been affected in multiple ways. All that we have known to be normal no longer isn't. We have experienced all kinds of losses in such a short amount of time, and it's not just the loss of our baby.
As bereaved parents living in the middle of COVID-19, we can easily feel the weight of cumulative grief. And cumulative grief is after you've experienced one type of loss. A second loss occurs before you've even had a chance to process the first loss. Mm-hmm. A third loss can also occur, and then that lands on top of the first two. It can also be known as compounding grief or grief overload.
Mm-hmm. Let's give an example within the context of COVID-19. You just lost your baby during the first trimester. You are shocked, devastated, and now dealing with the aftermath of pregnancy loss. You go home to find out your local authorities have just ordered everyone to shelter in place. Because your family has a member that is immunocompromised, you cannot see your parents for comfort. You can FaceTime or video conference call, but it isn't the same as a physical presence and hug of your parents. To make matters worse, your husband has lost his job due to COVID-19, and keeping up financially is a struggle. And so on and so on.
It's like you've been thrown a heavy rock, and before you can adjust your grip to even carry that rock, you get thrown another heavy rock, and then another, until you can't feel anything but the weight of all those rocks. You can't breathe. This is cumulative grief. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean having multiple losses in a short amount of time. It can be multiple losses experienced over years. More than ever, people are experiencing cumulative grief. I know for Tony and I, we personally have experienced cumulative grief. We lost Olivia on our 5th anniversary in October of 2013. And then on the year of her anniversary, of her being born, Tony's mom passed away after a major heart attack 3 days prior to October 5th, 2014. And then December, we found out that we were pregnant. And then we lost 7 weeks in to a miscarriage. We had a rainbow baby, James. He was. We found out we were pregnant with him. Was it March of 2014?
Nope.
Or 2015?
It'd be 2015, but it wouldn't be till like June.
Or May. Yeah, May, June.
June.
And then he was born end of January 2016. And then we had another miscarriage. In March of 2018, so that's why I had March on my brain, and lost my dad in 2018 at the end of June.
Yes.
And then jobs in between.
Yeah.
Those are compounding losses over the last 6.5 years. It's been very challenging, and it's been very difficult.
Yeah, and it feels like you haven't even had a chance to kind of get a grip on your first
Everything.
loss. Yeah, and then it's like, boom, another one happens, boom, another one happens, and then it's like...
Right. And the first few years happened so successively, the losses, Olivia, then your mom, and then the miscarriage, and then, the joy of James was awesome, but I had job changes in between that. It basically came around to 2018. I was thinking, this is the year. This is the year that everything's gonna be fine. There's gonna be no new losses. All that grieving is behind us as far as timelines, and this is a new year and it's a clean slate, And then, having our miscarriage in March and losing my dad in June just crushed. Like, I put the expectation up here and it was just wiped away, right? And so that's a personal experience of putting a timeline, saying, time will heal the wounds, and now that so much time has gone by, I'm ready to move on. And then all that, and then it just starts all over again. Moving into COVID-19 is a whole nother layer. So grocery shopping, do I even take him out? Do I keep him at the house? James, our 4-year-old now. Right. You can speak to a lot of that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a whole new set of circumstances that we are all navigating for the first time. And so
protecting your family.
With the lens of pregnancy and infant loss, I mean, this is our experience, so it's how we see things, it's how we make our decisions. And so it's, it was initially very nerve-wracking because there wasn't a lot of information that we knew about COVID-19 and how it transferred from person to person and so forth.
Right.
And so it was quite scary for me. Personally, I dealt with a lot of anxiety as to, making sure our family stays home, we're isolated, we're going to stay safe. Because even though the data said, or the research said, that young children were low risk, I had a very heightened fear of anything happening to James, or the fear of something happening to one of us and we would not be able to care for James. Like that unknown, the what if. And so that was such a heightened sense of fear for me. And it still is sometimes. It sometimes creeps back to me, and I'm having to kind of process and deal with that as it comes. And so it's...
Would you say those feelings, those thoughts are grief? Or would you say it's just a heightened sensitivity based on your experience?
I think it's both. I think because of what happened with losing our daughter and having 2 miscarriages, I think part of that grief is fear of losing another loved one, fear of losing your living children or child,
only living child.
And so it's kind of like intertwined with not having a sense of control, because we couldn't control what happened to Olivia, even though we knew what was going on. We knew what her situation was. We knew what we were up against. COVID-19 was a little different because this was all new. We had no idea how it was going to affect us if we contracted it.
Right.
And
so we just simply decided to hunker down.
Oh, yeah. And I think a lot of that obviously stemmed from my own fears of just not wanting to experience any kind of trauma or grief again.
Right.
And so especially when it came to our son, because I'm very protective of him, and sometimes overly protective, and I, there's times when I need to let go and trust that, we still have to live our lives and not live in a little bubble. But it's a balance of not a game, but like it's like an inner battle, trying to find that balance of taking precautions and also yet stepping out and still trying to live our lives. Here are 5 tips to help you cope with cumulative grief in light of COVID-19. Tip number 1. Grief is normal and natural. If you are feeling overwhelmed with the number of losses you are experiencing, you are normal. Grief is a natural response to loss.
I totally agree with that. I think the best thing you could do is just keep communicating. So if you're in a committed relationship with kids and or no kids, really, if you're in a committed relationship, just keep talking with your partner and telling them your concerns, your worries, and obviously they'll tell you how they, their interpretation of that, and you guys will figure that out together. And if you're not in a committed relationship or marriage, then communicating with those that are closest to you is probably the best advice. But your grief is normal, and your grief in relation to your thought process about COVID-19 is completely valid. So tip number 2, you are not alone. So we've talked a lot about supportive community. It's important for you guys to know that you are not alone in this process, that so many of us are feeling the weight of COVID-19 and its effects on our family, on our lives. And that's, across all areas. It's taken over every aspect of our lives, whether you're working or not, whether you have a home or you're renting an apartment. I mean, it covers every aspect of your life. So it also weighs heavy with our baby loss. Our experiences are unique and different, but we're not alone in this. So every one of us that are in the pregnancy and infant loss community are feeling the effects of COVID-19 uniquely for what we've experienced.
And tip number 3, take it one day at a time. Grief is overwhelming. And when you have multiple events causing you feelings of grief, it is that much more challenging and overwhelming. So take it one day at a time.
Yeah, I think early on when the pandemic first set in, I think we were in disbelief that it was happening. I know I was. I was just listening to the news to see where it was going to go day after day, not knowing exactly. And that was late February. And then by the time March came around, it was only a few weeks into it that they started initiating lockdowns. It's easy for us to be overwhelmed with that. It's easy for us to hunker down and say, this is the end. Everything's coming crashing down. We're all going to die. I mean, that's extreme, right? But that's what happens if we don't take it one day at a time. And if we rush to judgment, we rush to assumption that this is it, government's trying to control us, or all this other stuff that's going around at this time. You just have to peel that onion back one layer at a time, give it one day at a time, and be realistic with your household, with your immediate situation, and the stuff that's happening outside of your household as much as possible. Not ignore it. I mean, it is important to hear what's happening, but ultimately you have to decide for yourself what you're going to do, in and through this process and this time, and for yourself and for your family. Tip number 4, know your limits. So be aware of what you can and can't handle. It may change from time to time, and that's okay.
Yeah, I definitely think that trying to focus on knowing what your limits are in terms of, at least for me, my limit was my level of anxiety. What could I handle? What couldn't I handle? And for me, that quickly became not listening to the news and limiting my time on social media, where that was a bit challenging because you like to listen to the news a lot. And so I've had to say to him a few times, Emily, can you please put your earphones on or something, because I just can't stand listening to the news right now.
Right.
Because a lot of it's negative.
It's always news alert.
Yeah, and it's like one thing after another, and it's like I literally could not function. It's knowing what can't I handle and setting that boundary of I can't do this right now, and knowing that that's okay. And even setting boundaries in terms of who you see and who you visit and where you go. You need to decide what is best for you and for your family, and set those boundaries, and then focus on what you can do.
Right.
I mean, there are things you can still do. A lot of times we focus on what we can't, and then that overwhelms us. So we need to focus on the things that we can do.
Otherwise I think situations become impossible. You don't see a way through them or out, and when that may not even be the case at all. I think we have to be careful, guard our hearts and guard our minds, I think is important advice, and that is all encompassing in knowing your limits on what you can and can't do to control the situation and to keep your family healthy. All right, tip number 5, be open to seeking professional help. It's okay to ask for help from a counselor or a therapist. Cumulative grief can take time to unpack its many layers, and the support of a professional or a network of professionals is absolutely beneficial. So like we shared earlier, we have cumulative grief. We don't just have the loss of Olivia. We have the loss of our 2 other children through miscarriage. We have a loss of each one of us losing a parent. and our jobs, the transitioning, and the losing of a job, transitioning through jobs, all that's cumulative grief. And now we're in COVID-19. And I know for myself, I didn't specifically go to a marriage and family therapist from our child losses. I actually went to a marriage and family therapist just to talk about what I'm dealing with, my job, the current job I had at the time. But obviously through conversation and questions from marriage and family therapists, we talked about a lot of things, and we talked about Olivia, and we talked about losing Marilyn, Tony's mom, and we talked about our miscarriage, our first miscarriage at the time. We had not had a second miscarriage. I wasn't even in counseling at that point. So I found it extremely beneficial just to have this sounds very, very clinical, a third-party, non-biased individual just to talk to. And that's to no negative, connotation about my family or Tony, my direct family or my extended family. It just is a good thing in general. It's good for perspective, because how could you not get a different perspective from a person who doesn't know anything about you, doesn't know anything about your extended family, has no relation. So I found it very beneficial just to have someone that I can talk to, and just get that stuff out, because they don't really give you answers back. They may give advice on, here's a exercise that you can do, here's a thought process that you can help yourself through, or walk yourself through. But they're not, at least that marriage and family therapist, the way she does it, she was not there to tell me whether I was thinking correctly or incorrectly, which is also a good thing. Right,
yeah. My therapist was similar in that sense, that she did not give me specific answers and so forth on what I was supposed to do, how I was supposed to handle a certain situation. She was definitely one that was a listener, and just observing from what I'm saying, and from that she would kind of ask questions, certain strategic questions to kind of get me to think about
they're leading questions,
certain other areas of my life and how maybe they overlap or they affected one another. And so I think that is what cumulative grief is. It's like one experience of loss, and then it's impacting your view and how you relate and how you react to other circumstances that occur.
And we don't necessarily see that, because we don't realize, we compartmentalize. We think Olivia is separate from Marilyn, Tony's mom. Marilyn, Tony's mom, is separate from our miscarriages. Our miscarriages are separate from Olivia. Like, they're not.
Yeah, and I think even at least for me, COVID-19 has revealed to me that not everything, but a lot of what I've been experiencing, all my fears, anxieties of COVID-19, confirms that it's coming from, or a lot of it is stemming from, our previous losses. And so knowing that, it's like, wow, that to me, that says that's a lot. Like, and I didn't even realize it until we were like in the middle of COVID-19, and I'm like, what is going on? And so it's like,
and it can be seen in both lights, healthy and unhealthy. Obviously, I think just experiencing it is healthy. What we do with it and how we choose to let it affect us can be unhealthy. So cumulative grief may feel like it's impossible to get out from under, but with help and the right support, you can begin to take action that enables you to lighten your load one step at a time. We hope that you found this episode helpful. We want you to know that you are not alone, that you are loved, and your baby will always be cherished. And we are here to support you in any way that we can.
If you got value out of this episode, please give us a thumbs up so others can find us. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to get updates for when we release new content weekly. If you liked this episode and want to see another video podcast, click or tap here. If you are looking for more in-depth information, we have a grief series called The Pregnancy Journey, grieving from diagnosis to the loss of your baby and beyond. click or tap here.